What's going on, everyone? It's Mike back again, and I've got a different co-host tonight. It's not John. We've got Steve Dickinson here, who um, you've wrote a very powerful book, a very powerful book. I'm looking forward to it being fully released and everyone getting their hands on it. But we're going to go into that a little bit. But it's quite fitting that we had some news today regarding our second PSR breach. So, Steve, let me pass it over to you. Introduce yourself, and we'll get into it.
Okay. Well, I've been watching Everton for a very long time. I'm an old guy, and so my history going back to the first game watching against West Ham in the 69-70 season, in the days when we won the league that year. And I even remember sitting down, my dad sitting me down and watching the 66 FA Cup final, the thrilling victory against Sheffield Wednesday. And life for the Blues back then, life for the Toffees was very sweet. I just grew up thinking that we won trophies all the time. So I've had a sharp awakening ever since. We'll talk about the book in more detail, but very simply, I'm an author, and I teamed up and collaborated with Lyndon Lloyd, who is a friend of mine and one of the co-founders of the Toffee website, which most Evertonians get into pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And when I decided that I wanted to write initially an article about the Moshiri years, I found myself being drawn into the Toffee web archives regularly for facts and figures and information. And Lyndon and I agreed that we'd collaborate, and the article turned into a book. The genesis of it was very simple. On the M62, I was driving home after the 4-1 home defeat against Newcastle United. And the fans had really been up for it. There'd been a team bus welcome. We couldn't have done more, but ultimately the results are determined on the pitch. And that night, the team was outplayed by Newcastle, and my head was in my hands. Actually, my hands were on the steering wheel, but metaphorically, my head was in my hands on the M62, wondering where it had all gone wrong and what on earth had brought us to this disaster when it looked almost certain that we were going down.
Yeah.
And so it was a bit of stress relief, really, writing the book. And doing that with Lyndon, we were able to. There'd been so much bad publicity about the club in the months leading up to then, and about Evertonians, and we wanted to set the record straight, really explain in detail, in a chronological way, what had actually happened since Farhad Moshiri came on the scene at Everton, and that. I think has helped. A lot of people have said that they knew lots, but they'd forgotten a lot about all that had gone on. And as you know from having a look at the book yourself, it's a long book. There's almost 700 pages. A lot has gone on. So it took quite a bit of effort to pull it all together. But in the end, I think it's been very helpful for Lyndon and I to understand, and hopefully for other Blues to understand really the full story, not just what the rubbish that they read in the national media.
Yeah, Steve. For me, so just a little bit of a caveat to this, guys. I got hold of the book this weekend, and obviously, with what happened today, I haven't read the whole book. I've read about 25% of it, and I must say, the first 100 pages, let's go with, are really, really detailed. The explaining of the situation, the hope that he bore. It feels like a fan's view to what happened, which is what's come across really well. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, Steve. So let me ask you about today then. Obviously, the fans' view. Another 2-point deduction with a further committee hearing over a breach of about £6.5 million towards loan payments for the stadium, which the Premier League and Everton are contesting as to whether they should be contributed in the PSR hearing or not. What's your take on it?
Well, I think there's still a lot of confusion and angst among Evertonians, and rightly so. The Premier League have created confusion from the outset by not adopting a framework with clear guidelines. So they've embarked on these prosecutions of PSR rules, having had years where they were just sitting in the background gathering dust. And then they decided that they would bring them to the fore. But instead of having clear sentencing guidelines like any judge, any court in the land would have for any particular misdemeanor, they've just said that there will be discretion. And this discretion has led to confusion. And the more PSR independent commissions that come about, and we've had 1, 2, 3 now, including the appeal. Forest have had one, they've got an appeal pending. These independent commissions are coming up with, they're making it up as they go along. I don't subscribe to the fact that this is corruption. I think it's what happens when clear guidelines are not set. So that's one point. I think the Premier League have acted in a very amateur way. They leave themselves open to accusations of bias by the way that other clubs, such as Manchester City, Chelsea, and perhaps 1 or 2 others, have not been dealt with. And yet Everton have been dealt with twice.
Yeah.
So how's that fair? As one of my, and of course, these issues are now resulting in them changing the rules. So this leads to further confusion. I noticed there was a tweet from one of my favorite comedians, Sam Avery, today. And Sam said, Everton are getting thrown into prison for brewing moonshine the day before prohibition ends.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion around the whole process. And I put that down entirely to the Premier League. I think they've acted in a poor and amateurish way in the way that they've dealt with these things, probably thinking that if they picked on clubs like Everton and the so-called not big 6 clubs, a lot of these things would go under the radar. They'd be able to show that they were tough guys, and therefore no independent regulator was needed. And of course, it's become a much wider issue. I think unintended consequences have come out here, and the Premier League have probably rued the day that they started on this whole process. But I think the other point I'd like to make is I think Evertonians also realise that the way the club has been run has led to us being in this position where we are in the firing line. And Evertonians are the only ones who called out the board consistently over recent years and and made themselves very unpopular, particularly in the national media, when so many people were still defending Bill Kenwright, Farhad Moshiri, and other members of the board. And the Everton fans were writing in a very articulate and clear way, no, this is not good enough. The way you're running the club is poor. The governance is poor. So, yeah, that's another reason why I think Evertonians are rightly angry with the current situation, because obviously we still have the position where Farhad Moshiri still owns the club, but he's now very detached from all of this. The communication is poor, and the communication that comes out of the club, even now in the last few days and around the latest report and accounts, is not clear. It treats the fans as though they don't need to know things, and that's not right.
Yeah, I think I think you're absolutely spot on. I think the narrative has been built. You know, I have questioned numerous decisions this season from referees in the PGML. I've questioned the points deductions. I've questioned the way that it's been handled. I've questioned the difference between Forest and Everton. I've questioned the difference between how Chelsea can spend £1 billion in 18 months and Everton can't spend 15 million and without getting their wrist slapped. But I have really struggled with the basic metric of how the Premier League is now operating, which it seems to be very much, you've got your big six, they're our favourites. They try to leave the league. They were given a very, very, very gentle slap on the wrist to do so, to come back and to say, I'm sorry. And while you've got teams like Everton, who even in their statement today still said that they were happy and wanted to work with the Premier League to make sure that, you know, they're going the right way about this. And even in the hearing, I was reading some of the comments that were made on the paper following the decision, and the actual independent commission actually questioned the Premier League's integrity in some of the things that they've said and questioned around. They can't make statements around Everton foreseeing about, you know, Alicia Usmanoff and the money side of USM, etc. You couldn't mitigate for that. So this hearing has allowed mitigation against that, but the original PSR hearing didn't. You know, we were talking off air. The original Premier League advisory suggestion was to give Everton 12 points. Today, my understanding was it was 5. So the Premier League have campaigned to get Everton a 17-point deduction this season, or what it looks like to the, you know, the normal match-going fan, the fan that takes his son or his daughter to the football, the one that, you know, spends his money buying pies and shirts and tickets that are always going up, by the way. I think it's very fair to say that Everton fans, me, you, and everyone else associated with the club, we feel a little bit beat up, and it's not getting better. I mean, I feel beat up anyway, but I mean, it's a long story. But it's really difficult when it seems to be constant, you know. And I also thought the timing was hilarious, because we got the 10-point deduction last time. We then go on a winning run. We win a game of football this weekend. We then lose 2 points of it, finding out that there's a further hearing to do with stadium costs, which it's beggars belief. But as you rightly said, Steve, and as we all know, this club has been run like a shambles for the best part of 5, 6, 7 years. I mean, from the moment Moshiri came in, he was looking for Hollywood managers, and he was looking for big money signings from teams that at the time had been relegated or were in relegation battles. He spent millions of pounds over on some of the valuable players. I mean, I still to this day question why we went and signed Yannick Bolasie. Nothing against him individually, but a Yannick Bolasie over a younger Wilfried Zaha at the time, who probably didn't actually have the profile that he did at the time. Or why didn't he go and try and sign, you know, somebody else? He spent £48 million on Gylfi Sigurdsson, which I thought was ludicrous at the time. Still, he bought Klassen and Rooney, and then it transpires that actually it wasn't the director that he brought in from Leicester. It was probably more himself working with agents and directors of football. The whole Marcel Brand situation. And in your book, you allude to a lot of this. You talk about this and the mismanagement and the board itself. So moving on to the book, have you, because I'm not at the end of it, and I don't want you to give too much away, because I am deeply engrossed in it, I must say. And for anyone else, when they get their hands on it, read it. It is fantastic. Do you see positive shoots of light at this point, or are you concerned about the future with potential 777 or MSP or whoever else might buy Everton? Are you more worried than hopeful at this point?
I'm deeply concerned. I wish I wasn't, but I'm deeply concerned. And I think Farhad Moshiri's judgment at pretty well every stage in the 8 years, and it's almost exactly 8 years now that he's owned the majority shareholding in the club, his judgment has been so poor and continues to be so poor regarding the process with 777 and just in selling the club. And while we are so deeply indebted externally, I mean, more than £500 million now of external debt, where we're paying approaching 10% interest charges. Well, that's 50 million per annum. So if you take a club like ours with a turnover of about 180 million, how's a club like that ever going to make enough profit, operating profit, to pay back 50 million interest a year? And therefore, we need owners who can deal with that debt, refinance it, get it on lower interest levels with another lender, or capitalize the club and put money into the club. And until we find that solution, then the club is really on a knife edge. And yes, I mean, I was there along with 40,000 others on Saturday, and the football wasn't great. It was great to get the win, but it was a hard watch. And we know the situation regarding how thin the squad is. And we know that probably Jared Branthwaite, Anana, people like that will probably be sold in the summer. And will that money be reinvested in the squad? No, it'll go to pay off some of the debt. So even if we get through this season in the Premier League, and let's hope we will, by no means guaranteed, but let's hope we will, then we're going to go into next season with a lot more challenges. Add to that the number of players in the squad that are at the end of their contracts in the summer. It needs a radical shake-up. Could be a good opportunity, but with no money to spend, if that is the outcome. And I think even if 777 become the proud owners of the club, all the signs are that they don't have two bob to rub together. Never mind restructuring the whole playing squad of Everton Football Club. Yeah. So in short, I've still got lots of concerns about the club.
Yeah, one of the things that I did a little bit of research on 777 as part of the channel and talking about them, and they've gone into clubs like Genoa, and they've turned them around from a commercial sense. I think they doubled their commercial revenue, and I think their words on players about bringing profits in, etc. And they've tried to restructure and refinance the club in certain ways, but this is a Premier League football club who historically have been one of the bigger clubs in England. Do have a gravitas to them in certain ways. I wouldn't necessarily say we're as mighty as we once were, but we are. We're still fairly respected. I would argue. We were fantastic. I thought when the Big Six tried to break away, and our statement was very. I almost thought it was almost grandfather like. Very much like stop messing about, you like. Get back in line, sort of thing. That's what it felt like from a fan perspective. But when I look at the situation with 777, I have deep concerns. And then you've got the potential that Colin Bell's loan or MSP Capital, their investment can actually be turned into. Essentially, they can become a co-owner. My understanding is some form of owner within Everton, or have a stake within Everton. All of these things concern me. But you're just heading onto the book. Your book touches a lot of the financial elements and a lot of the decision making about Moshiri. So, tell us the title of the book and sort of give us what's out of all of the parts of the book. What's the bit that you're proudest of? Maybe the bit that you've done the most research, or the bit that's going to scare people the most.
Okay. Well, first of all, for those people that aren't familiar, there's the book. It's called The Unofficial Everton Timeline, and Lyndon Lloyd from Toffee Webb and myself are the co-authors. 2014 to 2023, the Moshiri years. Why 2014? Because that's when Bill Kenwright first met Farhad Moshiri, and from that time, Farhad Moshiri was doing his due diligence on the club until he purchased his initial stake in February 2016. Why the unofficial Everton timeline? Well, if you obviously, for people who are familiar with Goodison Park, and I'm sure everybody watching this is, you'll know that on three sides of Goodison Park, there's the official timeline, the graphics that go around, 137 graphics that go around three sides of the stadium, down the Bullens Road, along the Gladys Street, and back up the Goodison Road. And in 2014, the last image was put in place, which was the celebration of the signing of Romelu Lukaku. And since that time, no images. Now, just coincidentally, that's when Farhad Moshiri came on the scene, and maybe the club hasn't felt it had anything to celebrate. But there's been this sort of gap in the official timeline. So we thought, well, that's when our story is picking up. So hence we use the theme of the unofficial timeline as the title of the book. And we've structured it in such a way as it really does go through each chapter. I think there are 76 chapters, and each one covers a moment in history from 2014 onwards, right up to the present day. I think the latest edition before we pressed the print button was in February 2024. So it's pretty well up to date. As well as chronicling what actually went on, we tried to ask some deeper questions about what, for example, Farhad Moshiri, what key assumptions did he make when he prepared his business plan? Because despite people thinking he never had a business plan, this was a guy with, he was educated in accountancy in London. He spent 20 years working for large consultancy groups and accountancy practices. He was picked up by Farhad Moshiri, and when he was working, when one of Farhad Moshiri's companies was a client of, when one of Alisher Usmanov's companies was a client of Farhad Moshiri's, that's how they met. And then Farhad Moshiri worked for Alisher Usmanov for 20 years, being the principal tire kicker for all his mergers and acquisitions. So Alisher Usmanov, a very successful billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, wealth of about 20 billion. And he used Farhad Moshiri as the guy that to challenge and dig in to the businesses that he was acquiring. So you would think then that someone with that background of Farhad Moshiri would definitely have a business plan. And we looked at what some of the key assumptions must have been. And I'll just run through a few of those. First of all, he said at one of the AGMs early on in his tenure that money was no barrier to success. Well, yes, it was. It always is. No matter how much you've got, there comes a time when it runs out or you can't use it in the way you intended to. So yes, money was a barrier to success. He also made an assumption that Bill Kenwright would stay on in the long term. Now, people have different views about Bill Kenwright, but I think if you look back to his own words in the Everton report and accounts in 2011, Bill said then that he was desperately searching for a rich individual who would buy the club, and then Bill would be more than happy to step back. And if Bill had listened to his own advice, and when the deal happened in 2016, maybe 2017 after a handover, if Bill had stepped back into maybe a life presidency role or something like that, and been the guy with all of the contacts in the football world on Merseyside who could be there when someone needed to know something, then there could have been a changing of the guard. but Moshiri chose not to do that. Another governance point was that he also chose to bring in no external non-executive directors. So therefore, any board, and I've been in business 40 years, any board needs views from different people around the table, not just a bunch of yes people. And even when there were opportunities, like Robert Elstone moved on, so that we needed a new CEO. Sasha Rozantsev, who Moshiri brought in as his chief finance and strategy officer, he moved on. Eventually there was an opening for someone, or demand for someone really, with footballing knowledge on the board as well. But all of these people that were brought in turned out to be Bill Kenwright devotees. So however well-intentioned they were, there were no conflicting views around the boardroom. And I think this really struck at the heart of the lack of governance and some of the problems that we're facing now with PSR. Who was there saying, no, you can't do this, Mr. Moshiri? And without those different opinions around the table, then you end up in the situation that we're in now. We looked. You mentioned players before in the book. We looked at 15 players who had been pretty ineffective. If you look at the list, and you might choose to add a few more to that list, but if you look at that list, they were pretty ineffective, made very little contribution to the club. Some hardly played for the club because of injuries. Yet, when you add together their transfer fees and the wages that they were paid, there's $500 million of Farhad Moshiri's cash gone out the door.
Yeah,
that's staggering. And I think overall, if Farhad Moshiri's tenure, 8 years, it's a game of two halves. The first 4 years, he was spending money wildly on managers, on players, on terminating managers as well. We've spent over 50 million in hiring and firing managers. That's not their wages. That's just the termination fees for them and their coaches. And so the first 4 years was wild expenditure. In the second 4 years, the tap was completely turned off, really from after that summer when we bought Alan, Decore, James Rodriguez, Godfrey. That was the last of the big spend. After that, the club has been living on a shoestring. But all the money, then they've needed 400 million plus of Moshiri's money then on the stadium spend. And of course, that turned out to be very difficult timing as well, with the timing of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And the club's principal sponsor, USM, Alisher Usmanov, not only did the USM sponsorship go out the door, but of course the 200 million or whatever they were aiming for in stadium naming rights went out the door as well. So terribly bad timing. I don't think I see in today's hearing, the Premier League was still trying to say that that Farhad Moshiri should have anticipated that war. The American intelligence services, the day before Russia invaded, were saying there wouldn't be an invasion. So good luck to Farhad Moshiri for anticipating that.
It's beggars belief. And talking about Moshiri and the money and the tap, one of the big things for me, and you probably know better than me, so this is probably educating me, but the stadium, we were originally told that there was going to be a funding mechanism in place, and that there was structured funding, and that essentially we didn't need to worry really. But actually, 2 or 3 or 4 years down the line, it seems to be the one thing that is crippling us in the worst possible way. And Are we in this mess solely because of the stadium, or is this an accumulation of the last 4, 5, 6 years prior to this just biting us? Or
Well,
what's the
as I
deal?
said, I think Moshiri, I mean, just the facts and figures, Moshiri's put in now approaching 800 million into the club. And in the first 4 years, as I said, in the first half of his tenure, it was splashing the cash on managers and players. The second half has been all focused towards putting money into the stadium. Very early on, remember the meetings at St. Luke's, where the architect Dan Mice came over and did presentations. Well, I went to the first one of those, and Richard Kenyon, the marketing director, as he was then of the club, was there chairing the meeting. And everyone wanted to know what the stadium looked like and all of these things. Obviously, I did too. But during the question and answers, I put my hand up and said, could you explain the funding? Where's the funding coming from? And Dan Mice looked a little bit embarrassed and said, I've been assured that everything's fine. And Richard Kenyon stepped into and said, look, let me just tell everybody, the funding is not a problem. It's all sorted. Okay. All right. Hear that. So wind the clock forward another year or so, when Joe Anderson was the then Liverpool mayor, offering to pay half or even the full amount for the stadium on low interest rates, because there was a deal where the local council could borrow money from central government for infrastructure projects. And he could, and so the finance could have been in place there. And they turned it down for whatever reason, possibly thinking there was a better solution elsewhere, but they turned it down. And more recently, it's come out that a large Japanese bank had offered an infrastructure loan for the whole amount at 4% interest. And again, it was turned down. So why Moshiri kept doing this, only he could answer. I mean, we've written to him, we've sent him a copy of the book. We've said that our book is based on his public pronouncements, of course, but we've given him the chance to point out any errors we've made in the book. And we'd welcome that. But I certainly cannot understand why these opportunities for long-term fixed interest rate loans were turned down, because ultimately it's meant that he's had to provide money. And when he's run out of money because of perhaps the Ukraine war, then he's had to borrow from other people at extortionate interest rates. And even now, even in this current situation, until the ownership of the club is resolved one way or another, the last 100 million of the stadium is still not funded. The club report and accounts made it clear a week ago that funding was not in place. So where's that going to come from?
So 777 have got to come into this stadium, that's come into this club that's got £500 million of external debt, find a way of refinancing it, which may involve paying off MSP and working with Rights and Media Group.
Rights and Media, yeah.
So they've got to find a way of restructuring those two deals, on top of finding £100 million to finish the stadium. All while their capacity for finance is being trimmed at a rate of knots. I don't understand how they can do it.
Well, I think the Premier League have given them a bit of a deadline, because this MSP loan apparently is due for repayment by the middle of this month. So I think that's next Monday. And we'll see what happens. But you're right. They have to come up with, if they meet the conditions, the 4 conditions that the Premier League laid out, then 777 have got to come up with about 400 million pretty quickly. And that just gets them in through the door, never mind rebuilding the squad or doing anything else. So yeah, it needs deep pockets, and they've shown no signs of being people with deep pockets. Quite the contrary.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen all sorts of reports to do with the basketball league, a ladies football team. I think there was one yesterday where they were waiting on £1 million payment. They were having to make £1 million payment to someone, and they couldn't do it. There was rumours that there was another consortium potentially interested in buying Everton. Obviously, you may not know too much about this, like everyone else. Essentially, sort of come out of the blue. But what I don't understand, and you've sort of alluded to it because it sounds a little bit crazy to me, but I don't understand why he hasn't stepped away from this deal, Farhad Moshiri, knowing the pressure that it's putting on both him, 777, and us as fans. He did always strike me at the start as somebody that cared, and I think Bill Kenwright fell for that. I think he fell for that, and I'm not saying he doesn't care, but it seems odd that we're in this position. He doesn't speak to us. There's no farewell messages. There's nothing. And there is potential people out there that might go, we have got enough money to bail Everton out and to rebuild this team. They've got a new stadium, which is positive. We can finance against the stadium when it's completed, etc., etc., etc. It shocks me that we're still 6-7 months down the line with 777 when he hasn't tried to go and find somebody else potentially.
I agree with you. It's mystifying, and his legacy will come down to the new owners, frankly. If he is able to hand us over to suitable owners that can deal with the mess that Moshiri's created and help build the club, then Moshiri, people will look back in a few years' time at the stadium and think, yeah, well, okay, he did something, he built the stadium. But the way he's shaping up at the moment, it's a continuation of the poor judgment that he's shown at almost every stage of his tenure of the last 8 years.
Well, Steve, I mean, you're definitely better than my co-host, John, and I think everyone in the comments will agree with that statement. So, Steve, thank you ever so much for coming on. Is there anything you want to add before we go? The floor is yours. Anywhere where people can find you, or an area to plug the book, etc. You name it. Well, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, first of all, just to say that people can find me on Twitter or X. I go under the name of Top Balcony Man there, but my mugshot's there, Steve Dickinson, so you can see exactly who I am. The book is available on Amazon. It's available in paperback or Kindle format, and we're actually working on the audiobook at the moment. So for people who prefer to listen to podcasts and listen to books in cars and things like that, then there'll be a version available for you soon. But in the meantime, you can go onto Amazon, just search for the Unofficial Everton Timeline, and that's where you'll find the book. And don't take my word for it, but just have a read of some of the reviews and the comments, because the people who've bought it have been very generous with their comments. They put us to number 1 in the Amazon bestseller list in our category, which is very nice. And yeah, we're very pleased with how things are going. But for me, it's not about the sales of the book. It's about trying to help people understand, help Evertonians understand the bigger picture of what's going on, to try and make sense of the mayhem that's been going on in the club in recent years. And information is always good, really, for that. So people hopefully will be able to grab a copy of the book and help them just get their head around what's been going on at Everton Football Club.
Brilliant. Steve, thank you ever so much for coming on. I'm sure I speak for everyone that is viewing us and listening in the cars, etc. You have been incredibly enlightening. I'll continue reading the book. I think it's absolutely
Please
fantastic, and I will endorse it 100%, guys. The book so far, and I've read the comments in Amazon. The comments are fantastic. The book is incredibly insightful. It's a book that will open your eyes. It will scare you a little bit, and it will make you remember things that you might have forgotten. You know, decisions that were made, certain people involved in the club. I'm really looking forward to getting to the Marcel Brands bit, because I think that's going to be quite tasty with what happened with Marcel Brands and his departure and the running of the club at the time. So I'm really looking forward to that. So, yeah, Steve, thank you ever so much for coming on. And
I'll just warn people that the foreword was written by Dr. David France, Dr. Everton, who's written 18 books on Everton. He's the guy who put together the memorabilia, the incredible memorabilia that is the Everton collection, and from which the images around the stadium have been grabbed. And he said to me as he was doing that, he said, "You need to put a warning in this book." So we have actually printed a label in there. It says, "Caution: contents may cause nausea, insomnia, and alcohol dependency."
And it's rather fitting, Steve. It fits perfect.
Yeah. So take care. Anyone who reads it, just take care. We'll check in with you.
Yeah. Well, first point's on John anyway, guys. So if you see John at the stadium, just grab him, get a pint off him. He'll sort you right out. Yeah, guys, it's been a pleasure. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and I will see you soon. Peace.
Thank you.